one of the other things you're going to be asked to do is to factor by grouping. Factor by grouping. And that's the easy kind. Most students don't have any issue with that. So let's look at what that looks like. So here's number one. We have 28x cubed minus 7x squared plus 12x minus 3. And so you see how there are four terms right here? 1, 2, 3, 4. So for us right now, you're going to factor by grouping. See, it says grouping. So you're going to group the first two, and you're going to group the last two. So as you go through those videos, you're going to, and there's quite a few problems with those videos. So make sure you look at those videos as you go through these lessons. But you're going to look at the first group and the second group. When you look at the first group right here, I'm going to go ahead and cover this up. Look for the GCF. So the GCF of 28 and negative 7 is 7. So you're going to factor out a 7. You have x's in both of those. You have x cubed, x squared. You use the one with the smallest exponent. And then times, just like we did before, 7 times 4 is 28. X squared times x is x cubed. Minus 7x squared. Now you see I already factored out 7x squared, right? So you're going to say, what goes here? Because this is already this. Well, what goes here, you got to think, remember the distributive property. 7x squared times a negative 1 is a negative 7x squared. All right, so that's what you do there. Now I'm going to go ahead and uncover this, and then I'm going to cover this right here. I'm going to do the same thing. So the GCF of these two terms is just 3. 3 goes into 3, and 3 goes into 12. Okay, but you always factor out that middle sign right here. So you're going to factor out a plus 3. Okay, so I'm going to cover this up. So you're going to say 3 times 4x is 12x. 3 times a negative 1 is a negative 3. If you are doing this correctly, see this part right here? Both of those have a 4x minus 1 in common. And so all you do then is your final answer will be this. Very simple. Your final answer will be you take out the 4x minus 1, put that in front, times, and when you take out the 4x minus 1, you're left with 7x squared. And then take out the 4x minus 1, you're left with plus 3. And that's your answer. So you have 4x minus 1 times 7x plus 3. So that's factored by grouping. Let's do another one. So let's suppose we had this one. We had 2xy plus 5y squared minus 4x minus 10y. So again, 4 terms. 1, 2, 3, 4. So whenever you have 4 terms, you're going to try and factor by grouping. So we're going to group the first two, group the last two. So let's go ahead and cover this part up, and let's do the first one. So you see this 2 and the 5? The GCF of 2 and 5 is just 1. And notice I don't have any x's in both, but I do have y's in both. So this is y to the first, and this is y squared. So I need for you to see that the GCF of these two terms is just y. I'm going to factor this. I'm going to factor that y out. So y times, remember the distributive property, y times something is going to give me 2xy. So I'm taking out this y, and I'm left with 2x. So 2x goes here. Plus y times, I'm hoping you see this, 5y. So y times 5y is 5y squared. Remember, y times y is y squared. Okay? Now, be careful over here. Remember when we did this one, we said you're going to factor out that middle sign right here. Okay? And then remember in a previous problem, when you have to factor out the negative exponent, you have to be careful. A negative times a negative is a positive. Remember that? Okay. So you're going to factor out a negative GCF here. Okay, so if I look at negative 4 and negative 10, the GCF of negative 4 and negative 10 will be negative 2. You're going to factor out the negative factor. There's an x here, y there, but you don't have any common variables. So all you're going to do is factor out a negative 2. When I do that, we got to put something in here now. Negative 2 times a positive 2x, so negative 2 times 2x is a negative 4x. A negative 2 times a positive 5y, a negative times a positive is a negative. So negative 2 times a positive 5y is a negative 10y. If you're doing this correctly, look at what you see. Those are the same. So once you get to that point, then your answer will be, you're going to factor out the 2x plus 5y, and then you're going to be left with y, in parentheses, y minus 2. And that's your answer. So that's how you factor these four terms by grouping. All right, so that's that little intermediate process here. Okay, let's look at one more on factor by grouping. Let's suppose you had this one. 3x squared plus 4xy plus 3x plus 4y. All right, so four terms, 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to group the first two and the last two. That's the way you're going to approach it. Group the first two, last two, factor by grouping. Cover this up if you have to. Now, if I look at the first group, this is a 3, this is a 4. The GCF of 3 and 4 is 1. I have a y here, but no y here, so I'm not going to have any y's in the GCF, but I will have some x's, because there's x's in both terms. Question is, how many do I need? I have 2 here, 1 here. Remember, always the one with the smallest exponent. So I'm going to factor out an x. Times x times 3x is 3x squared. X times a positive 4y. See, x times 4y is 4xy. Okay, now let's go to the next one. Now, here's what confuses students. So remember, you're always going to factor out a positive factor. So they look at this and they say, well, there's nothing in common. There actually is. There is a common factor. There is a greatest common factor. So remember what we talked about. The GCF of 3 and 4 is 1, right? And so that's your factor. So you're going to say plus 1 right here. You're going to write a 1. And then notice you're going to say 1 times 3x is 3x. 1 times a positive 4y is a positive 4y. And notice this and this are now the same. So you're going to factor that out, and that will be your answer. So you're going to say 3x plus 4y times, so you factor out the 3x plus 4y, you're left with x. And then factor out here, you're left with plus 1. And that's your answer. So 3x plus 4y times x plus 1 will be this. All right, so that's factor by grouping. So whenever you do factor by grouping, you're going to group the first two, the last two, and then factor out the GCF from each part. And then if you're doing it correctly, what you see in those parentheses will be the same, and you just factor it out. All right, so that's factor by grouping. And there's a lot more practice problems. There's a lot more problems in those videos. So you need to look at those videos that deal with factor by grouping. Okay, now